Hello, everyone. Welcome. I see folks rolling in here. We will give everyone a moment to get joined. See some familiar names. Welcome back to many of you. Always curious to hear where people are calling in from. If you want to pop it in the chat, where are you located? Hello. We've had folks from all over the world, so always really fun to see. Canada, Peter, we have another Canadian joining us. Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment once folks have a chance to join. Well, I will go ahead and get the housekeeping out of the way as a few more folks are still rolling in. Once again, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for Customer Success Unlocked. My name is Marley Wagner. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Digital Customer Success here at ESG. Thanks so much for joining us for our webinar titled Demystifying Customer Success from the Board's Eye View. I'll be serving as your host today as usual, alongside my co-moderator, ESG's Vice President of Customer Success, Peter Armely. Hi, Peter.
Hey, Marley. Hey, everybody.
Before I introduce our guest today, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. First, today's session will be a fireside chat style interview, so you won't be seeing slides on your screen, but I promise your Zoom is working just fine. Second, a reminder that we are recording today, and you will receive the recording within 24 hours of the session right in your email inbox. And throughout the hour today, please feel free to submit questions via the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screen. We'll get to as many questions as we possibly can. So with that out of the way, I want to welcome our guest, Vice President of Customer Success at Sunstone Partners, Joanel Bernardo. Welcome, Joanel. Thanks for joining us.
No problem. Nice to see all of you, and super excited just to have this chat and also answer questions if anyone has them.
Absolutely. And this is a really meaty topic, so I want us to really jump right in. So, you know, before we kicked off today, Joanel and I were just catching up, and we were reminiscing. We met a little over 2 years ago, right around the beginning of the pandemic. I think it was, like you said, literally like week 1 of lockdown, and the world was a very weird place. And you were actually in a totally different role at that time.
Yes.
Similar title, right? But you were working at a startup, at an operator, versus now you have joined Sunstone and are in that private equity space. So, you know, obviously your job title as VP of Customer Success is a common one we see in the industry, but it's not super common yet within private equity firms. So, you know, I'd love for you to just start us off, Joanel, by talking a little bit about similarities and differences between your role now versus when you're at, you know, an individual company, when you were in that role, and as many of our audience members today, I'm sure, are as well.
Yeah. So it's definitely making the move has been interesting. And I say that because I'm now challenged with sort of applying what I know as an operator and divvying that out to various companies that are in our portfolio. So the challenge is the speed at which you can actually get to know the teams that you're working with, as well as learning like what products are they offering, what challenges do they experience, and sort of how quickly can you get to know a company and help advise on what they need to do or could be doing differently without having all the context of working there. So typically, you know, you get a month, you get 6 weeks to figure a lot of that out. You have to do a lot of research. And then you want to be able to start making an impact through finding, you know, various low-hanging fruit projects that you can help with, or even things that we can take on our own plates. And I will point out that from my perspective, we, at least at Sunstone, we have a full operating function, which includes customer success. We also have a finance arm, a talent arm, and a lead demand gen arm as well. So lots of us who have been operators in the past working forward on, advising companies in the portfolio.
Yeah, and lots of mirrors between your portfolio companies and then, your firm at Sunstone, right? I'm sure you work super closely with your counterparts, people with the same job title as you, in your portfolio companies as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And even helping them sort of understand what customer success is. So a lot of the companies that we're working with, we're helping to define what is customer success, what should it be, what does great look like, and what steps do we need to take in order to take our program to the next level. So for some companies, this is just starting out from scratch. And for other companies, it's taking them through a reset of understanding what's the difference between support, account management, and customer success, and really evangelizing that vision through to execution.
It's really great to hear that approach, Joanel. And for many of us who've been in this field for a long time, those are very common questions that people have and struggle with for years, in fact. And so it must be nice for them to have you kind of as an assigned guide for them. And so I'm wondering, how do you go about in that kind of atmosphere of, I think it's kind of a warm reception you probably get. How do you go about collaborating with these CS leaders in these companies?
Yeah. Oh, wait, I think there's a note. Can everyone hear us okay? Everyone can? Good. Okay. I will try to speak a little bit louder. So as far as, getting to know and building out these relationships, it really starts with those first initial meetings and working with those customer success leaders to understand, what do you do well? Where do you need help? What do you think is an obstacle for you? If you didn't know, I used to be a salesperson. So discovery is like a big part of what I do, and approaching it with a genuine desire to help. When I take the time to get to know them and understand their struggles, I really take that customer success philosophy of defining success, understanding how we measure success, and I translate that into my conversations with these CS leaders, as well as, CROs, CEOs, and help to create the bridges and everything that, they're saying versus what they're doing. And a lot of times what I've found is, as operating people, right, we're in the weeds. We understand the ins and outs of what we do. You can ask me, how do I save an account? And I'll give you a million different ways that I can save an account. And what I've learned in my transition is translating that to a very high level understanding is probably like the biggest opportunity that we all have, is helping to give that context with everything that we know that's in the weeds, and elevating that discussion to a person whose desires are really centered around the growth and longevity of our business. So it's a very different, it's kind of, we talk about demystifying it, right? But it really is like, how do you teach someone to speak a different language? A language that customer success probably hasn't fully adopted yet. Because we've always lived under an umbrella, right? There's always been a shadow over us of maybe we reported to a CRO. Yeah. Maybe we had a chief customer officer. And those people were always very aligned to revenue, and they were always very much aligned to growth. And CS doesn't always have that analytics, or doesn't always have that numbers mind. And I think that's where our challenge really lies, is getting into the numbers and understanding from a perspective of, maybe it's the board, maybe it's a C-suite. What do they need to see and understand in order to feel confident in what we do?
So how do you go about ensuring that alignment? I mean, your company has a point of view, otherwise you wouldn't be investing in these firms. So knowing that you need to kind of make sure there's going to be certain returns, and at a practical level, you're guiding these CS leaders to put that into action. How do you ensure they're aligned around that?
So it's a couple things. Helping to quantify the work that we're doing is huge, right? What should you expect if we do this well? And really helping to paint the picture of what does a 1% increase in retention look like for us? What does a 2% increase look like for us? And so when you think about increasing retention, then we're obviously gaining dollars. And then you work backwards. And you say, okay, well, in order for us to retain more customers, we need to understand what their success outcomes and desires are. How do we do that? Okay, well, we meet with them more often, right? We align our executives to their executives, and we get a relationship going that is more high level, probably a lot more focused on bigger themes. And then we sort of build a customer journey around meaningful touch points. And when you talk about it from that perspective, most of the leaders that I'm speaking with get to that point of like, oh, yeah, that's what we need to do. We need to really quantify and talk about the return that we're getting. And that's another area that I think we want to start focusing on, is really the storytelling of the work that we do. So we save this customer, which totals this much revenue. And if we're able to grow that customer, we're going to see an extra 50K in ARR. And I think that's like the way we have to start talking about it, because our actions do have a monetary value behind them, but we have to really remind people of what that is.
I think that's the secret to customer success, actually.
And it's hard because remember before, like the evolution of customer success, let's go back like 8 years. Customer success before was like happiness and NPS scores. And does your customer like you? And then we started making a move towards revenue and retention. And then it became growth. And you start to recognize that the same metrics that the sales team is looking at is what we need to be looking at too. And adopting best practices like renewal forecast. Do you do a renewal forecast? Do you kind of talk to your teams and ask them, you know, let's look at your Q4 renewals. Let's make a call. What's a low call? Where do you think you're going to be if, you know, at the very, very bleakest, you know, result? And what do you think it'll be at the very highest result? And we start talking about forecasting from that perspective. And I think when you start talking about the numbers, people start to see customer success as a revenue generating team versus this cost, right? This continuous cost.
Before Marley asks the question, I just want to say you're touching the third rail of customer success.
Yes. Yeah,
it's, I mean, and that's another part, as I've gone into this role, really helping people change the opinion of customer success away from a cost center, away from, you know, what we call cost of goods, right? A COG, but really revenue generating. And when you start to talk about it from that perspective, people start asking questions like, well, how do they generate revenue? What do they have a number? Do they have a goal? And you start to recognize, wait a second, they've always had these goals. We just haven't highlighted it and showcased it in a way that maybe other people understood.
Yeah.
And I think to that point, Joanel, you know, with all the economic uncertainty and you know, businesses kind of tightening their belts and nitpicking at numbers a little bit more intensely right now, I think that becomes even more important, right? You know, I'm sure you both have seen a lot of conversations on LinkedIn lately about that kind of a topic. And I think it's only going to continue to become more important and more critical. And what did you call it, Peter? The third rail?
The third rail.
The third rail, exactly. That's going to become the new reality that all CS leaders are going to need to be able to answer to, you know, in the world we're living in today. So I wanna back up to two things you said earlier, Joanel. One, you were talking about, you know, operators are very in the weeds, right? They're hands-on, they're doing a lot, they have to-do lists that are miles and miles long, right? And then you were talking about, all right, so we're thinking about these ultimate goals of, you know, an increase in retention by 1 or 2%. How do we back out of that? What does that mean? We have to actually go do. You know, and I think something I've been really interested in as you and I have been preparing for this is, can you talk about how involved you in your role, you know, working at the PE firm with your operators, how involved do you get in those more tactical projects? What do some of those projects look like that those leaders are working on? And then what is your role in, okay, this is happening, what's Joanel doing?
Yeah. So what we actually do is we start by just understanding what practices they already have. So what do you do today? And as we learn more about their business and we learn more about the sales cycles, you know, best practices that they probably either are currently doing or maybe are thinking about doing, we help to identify what low-hanging fruit is. So, you know, if you've got 15 projects, 15 things that are super important, what's the one thing that's going to have the most impact, and how do we do that now? And then really helping to identify what that ROI could be. Right. So if we talk to more customers, we're probably going to get more feedback, and we're probably going to be able to be better predictors of retention and growth. So sometimes just being that direct is helpful, because when you're in the weeds every day, everything's important, and you're dealing with fires, right? You have a customer that's going to churn, therefore you spend all your energy trying to save that customer, and you don't get a lot of time to go think about that one NPS project that you wanted to kick off. So what we do is we offer that support. So we can sit down and say, we can do this with you, and we can collaborate together and build out, you know, let's say an NPS program. Or if you find it to be easier, and you think about it, right? I have to also have some bandwidth for this. I can build out your NPS program for you. And sometimes people are like, oh my God, yes, please do that, because I don't have time. Or, you know, they'll say, well, I still want to collaborate on it. How can we work on it together? So in different instances, some people will say, I'll put together the first draft. Can you take a look at it, give me your feedback, and we'll just keep iterating on this together. And in other instances, they're like, here's all the logins you need, go for it.
Oh, I was just going to say, it depends on where that falls on their priority list, right? And that's probably a huge deciding factor for those leaders when they're like, you know, do I want someone to just take this and run with it? Or do I really have strong feelings about what happens?
Yeah. And sometimes, you know, it's interesting too, because coming from a space where, you know, you make the decisions and you go and do what needs to be done, it's also learning to say, okay, I'm in a racy. I'm somewhat accountable for getting it done, but I'm not the person who's, you know, going to own this long term. So what does this look like, and how can I be a good collaborator with this person as we transition into this, sort of like newer version of customer success? Can I build something that they can maintain on their own and continue to iterate against versus, building what I would build if this were my team, kind of that way, if that makes sense.
Mhm. So maybe before we go even further, maybe it'd be helpful for the audience if you explain the differences between, maybe we've made an assumption, private equity, that's where the sector you're from, versus venture capitalists. I mean, I have an opinion, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And specifically, I guess, with respect to, would the role of your role be different in a VC firm versus where you're in private equity right now?
Yeah. Let's see. Where do I start there? Okay. So typically VCs, and it has a lot to do with like where your business is. So how new of a company are you? How much established revenue do you have? And what are your business goals? So typically in venture capital, they are looking to invest in companies that are a startup. They are still looking to make key hires in engineering, product development, sales, marketing, and they really need that influx of cash in order to generate like that product market fit. And you'll see this, you see so many companies that are leading all of these various rounds. Typically that is like, let's help you get started. We think you have a great idea and we want to back you. Private equity, specifically growth equity, is really focused on established companies who are looking to grow. Sometimes they are also looking to liquidate some of their capital, right? They want people, they want to pay out a founder, right? Or maybe they need to do an exercise like that. But in growth equity, they're established, they're generating revenue, and they also want to take on additional market share through mergers and acquisitions. So, they recognize we don't necessarily want to build this new function. We can probably acquire a company that builds out the function, and we can absorb that into what we do and create a new offering from it. So Sunstone does spend its time in the growth equity side of the house. So we're making investments in founder-led businesses who want to grow and who are also looking to make operational shifts. And that's something that might be specific to Sunstone, but we definitely vet out the companies that have strong leaders. We believe in their management teams. We're excited to work with those management teams, but we also recognize we have something that we can give them as well. And it comes in the form of experience as well as the resources from the portfolio operations team. And I think that answers one part of your question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, you did a good job answering that. And I would just say, maybe you can touch a little bit more on, or whether whether your peer role in VC would reflect significant differences, or would they have a different focus, or what?
Or is that even a thing yet, right?
Yeah, maybe not.
It's so new, even in private equity.
I would say that in my experience, there are some VCs out there that have a arm of the business. Like I know some have like a marketing arm, and they'll help with, the marketing aspects. They'll help with lead generation. And I think that that's very specific to being in a company that has these very specific needs. So they're like, how do we help you get your next set of customers? How do we get you from 10 customers to 50? And they'll give you the cash and the resources for that. For us, I think you have to ask. I know that there are some other firms out there that do have these success arms. And I think every firm does it differently. So you have to understand, as you're doing this vetting, what kind of resources do you have? Will you act as a customer success leader until we get one? Will you do majority of the work, or will you basically say, call us when you have somebody that we can help? And I think from my experience, I've always had, I've had like a counterpart, right? We've had someone that's been focused on this, and is building. They've either been focused on this, and there are probably some areas that we can help with. And then on the other side of the house, it's like, okay, what would we build? And what does that look like? So they're not one size fits all when we acquire them.
Is anything one size
I was
fits
going to
all?
say
I
this.
don't think so.
Not anymore, right?
No, doesn't exist. Not at all. So Joanel, we already mentioned when you and I first met, you were working in a totally different business model. So I'd love for you to share with our audience kind of what interested you initially about moving into this customer success in private equity, in growth equity space, and how you ended up in this particular role.
Yeah. So I'm sure people are going to be like, wait, what? I am a person that writes down every goal. So I had this goal of wanting to move into consulting in time for my 40th birthday. I am also a person that doesn't believe that I never want to wait until the goal is supposed to expire or start to get going. So one of the things that I was trying to understand is, what does that consulting look like? And it's true, when I started at this other company, we were doing an exercise with ESG, and I was like, oh, this is interesting, right? Like this is one way that I guess consulting could work, and you could really help companies move into phase 2 of their journey faster. I didn't think that I would end up in private equity. I really was just sort of getting by and doing what I needed to do at my last company. And we had a LinkedIn conversation, and they were like, look, this is what we're looking to do. We are looking for people who have experience operating, building out small teams, but also, have an idea of how to operate when you have more revenue, right? So it was really a perfect storm per se. And so when I entertained it, I said, okay, well, what would this look like? What are you looking for? And how do you empower these teams to go out there and make an impact? Because it's not just getting a job at a company and then going out and building out customer success. You're actually you're the subject matter expert, but you're not necessarily having to do all the work. So when I made that transition, I was really excited about it. I'm still super excited about it. People ask me all the time, you've been there for almost a year. I'm like, this is it. This is the place that makes me feel like I can make an impact. It brings me a lot of happiness. But I do realize, what I loved the most and what I wanted to get out of moving into this role was the ability to help more people. And as much as we believe that we can do that, when you're in a company and you're sort of entrenched in their goals and what they're working on, your ability to make an impact, depending on where you are in that business life cycle, is sort of limited. And so I always said, this would be the direction I want to go. And I feel very fortunate that, I answered a LinkedIn message. But I do believe that you're going to start to see more of these types of roles, because even as we think about our growth, we say, well, what size do we need to be in order to expand our teams? And are we hitting a point where we need to potentially outsource some of these activities, or would that mean that we bring in an additional hire? So it kind of goes with the size of the firm that you're working with. But the end result is still there, right? You still have the same desired outcomes as if you were working for a firm or a company directly, right? Like I'm still challenged with how do we grow revenue? How do we help to put people in places where they're making an impact, but we're not, just spending a ton of money doing so. I still have to help people figure out what tools are going to be best for them and advocating for tools. I say this all the time. I'm like, okay, well, when are we going to get them some tools? So the same challenges that I've experienced in my day-to-day, I'm sort of saying, here's my opportunity to help get them unblocked by making suggestions and having a voice at a decision-making level.
And I so agree that we're gonna see this be so much more common in the next year. A year from now, I bet if we revisited this conversation, there would be tons of CS leaders working at private equity firms, right? And I also think it's interesting. You were talking about ESG, and we've talked about this before as well. There are a lot of similarities actually between how you work with your portfolio companies and how ESG works with our customers. Right. So I think that's another really just interesting component of what we're talking about.
And it really is like, it's speed. That's one of the reasons why like people come to ESG, right? Like, tell me what I need to work on. When we do an assessment, you need to tell me what my low-hanging fruit is and then help me go do that. It's very similar to what I've done in my role, is really to say, hey, I don't think that this is a priority. You actually should focus on this. And helping people recognize that customer success is not a siloed group that has to work independently. We are codependent upon every single organization in the company. And the company is actually codependent on us as well, right? Like being able to tell that story. I joked that I thought the evangelism would like eventually go away. Right. And it doesn't, it never does. Like, I swear, like, I don't even know if in the next 5 years, evangelizing for customer success will not be needed, because it's consistently a challenge. And, Peter, I'm sure you experience this too. Just the advocacy that we have to continuously drive at a C-suite level is still, fairly high. And I think, that's the opportunity is putting that, emphasis on customer success and why you need it, and why it's not just support, why it's not just service, why it's not this. Like, that's a lot of what we do still.
Yeah. The way I see it is, the more success I've had at persuading and explaining what it is, the more opportunities that present themselves for additional kind of reasons for explaining and persuading. And I think you're right, Joanel. I think 5 years from now, there'll still be this powerful need to evangelize. And I think it's because it's going to be company-wide. It won't be, it'll be understood that customer success is not a siloed organization, or if it is, it's going to fail. It needs to have everyone else on board. It kind of leads into the next question I have. And I want to, first of all, say, I don't think you're a freak for writing down goals. I think that's a pretty good idea, especially at your level, where you're trying to kind of embark on something kind of new, not kind of new, but really new. And when Marley first told me about this topic, I thought, this is fantastic. I've never spoken with anyone in private equity about this topic at all. So I was looking forward to it. The question is really around the impact that customer success can have on company valuation. Now, I think our community talks about it a lot, but I think it's mostly on fumes of faith and hope rather than specific kind of details and evidence. But this is just kind of a hunch I have, but I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on that, whether a strong CS practice function can have a positive impact on company valuation.
It is, so there's this concept of due diligence, right? So every company, before you make any sort of investment, there's an extensive due diligence process. What do you do for this? What kind of customers do you have? How much churn do you have? There's a lot of those types of questions. And I think we have to remember that we have to, when you're looking to fundraise, regardless if it's VC or private equity, you know, whatever it may be, you are selling every aspect of your business model, your product, your processes, your sales reps, your CS reps, your support. Everything goes into that board deck, or everything goes into that deck, right? Where we're talking about what we do, where we have an opportunity is really to say, having this team is not about checking the box. It's actually about the results that we can produce. And when we talk about results, we're talking about how much growth has customer success helped to influence. On average, what was a customer's starting ACV versus their current ACV? And how did we accomplish that? And I think that's where like the ego has to go out the window, right? Because it's a team effort. Sales, yes, heck yes. Sales, you close that deal, you do all the commercials, you do all the negotiations, because those are the things that most likely customer success is not passionate about doing. But in order to be able to do those things, there is someone who keeps the lights on every single day, and that's that customer success organization. And that customer success organization exists because we're doing, right? We're driving adoption of our platform. We're driving usage and if you're not a SaaS business, it's okay, right? Services is still a thing. Sunstone is a service. We love some tech-enabled service companies. So really helping people understand that from a services perspective, we are helping, regardless of the product that we sell, we are helping to ensure that our customers are accomplishing their goals, right? And that's creating results. That creates retention. That's creating growth. And, you know, right now the economy is kind of doing its thing, but in a normal world, being able to ask for a 5% lift year over year in whatever cost of your service, your good, that comes from being able to say our customer success team has continuously established value, that even if this customer doesn't grow, we can ask for 5 to 10% more for the service that we currently offer, no problem. We're not renegotiating so they spend what they spent in 2020. They're okay spending more because they recognize that value continues to grow. And so I think we have to get better at the numbers. I really think that if you ask me what's our opportunity, it's like, we got to get good at math. We're really good at feelings, right? We're really good at feelings. We are not great at the numbers, the quantitative ROI. And it's probably because we don't have systems that enable us to get that information really, really easily. But that doesn't mean that you don't have resources within your company that can help to generate that kind of growth or that kind of like analysis. And I think there is also this aspect, someone mentioned it in the chat, humans are hard to quantify, right? Like human relationships. But I do think we have an opportunity to sort of say, like, how many relationships with executive sponsors do we have at a executive level? Because those executive relationships don't come from our executive waking up one day and like, oh, I should go make a friend over there. Like there's someone who introduced them to that person. And there's someone in our company that taps that executive on the shoulder and says, it's time to reach out to so-and-so. Have you reached out to them yet? Can you help me? Right. And like, we have to remember, like, customer success is kind of the day of wedding planner, you know? So everyone's like, wait, what? So you ever been to a wedding and you see that one person that's like, has the headset, they have a clipboard and they're like, kind of, you can see them, but you kind of can't see them. Those are the, like, that's customer success. We make sure that like this wedding goes off without a hitch. We tell people where to stand. We tell people what to do. We remind people to go over there because we're doing pictures right now. Like we are doing all of those things, and it is hard to quantify, but I think we have to get away from saying like it's hard and finding things to count. Right. So I like you kind of have to be like the Count in Sesame Street. He counts everything. He finds everything to count and he counts it. And at some point you're going to find like, oh, wait, that did make a difference, right? We did generate more revenue when we added additional headcount. We did save more accounts when we added in this process. Like I think we just need to start thinking about how we start measuring, and no one's ever going to tell us what to measure, right? No one's an expert in customer success. Customer success is like been around for what, 10 years? So there's no books. And even then, you have to take what you're learning and say, how do I apply this to my company? And that's your challenge as a leader, right?
Yeah, that last point is super critical. It's about your company too. You have to understand your business to make that work. And it reminds me of what you're saying, Joanel. Many years ago, I was at a Gainsight Pulse event and I spoke, and I talked about the spectrum of touch and our customer success model. And I said, right now, we're kind of on the art side of things. We need to move into the science realm, while at the same time maintaining that kind of humanistic, artistic bent, but being very scientific about it. And I mean, the way you elegantly talked about measurement and how we have to get good at math, I think is a better catchphrase than what I used. So I might borrow that.
No, I mean, go for it. Definitely use the Count Sesame Street thing too. I'm okay with that. No, I want to say that that's like our biggest challenge in CS, because sales has all the numbers. Like when I'm in meetings and we're talking about things from our level, we're all about the numbers. And in customer success, I realize like, wow, we just don't have that. And we don't necessarily have the support either. So there's a lot of analysis. Shout out to all of the analysis from previous companies that I had to do, because, you start to recognize what are the business questions you're asking yourself, and how do you go get that data, and how do you tell stories with that data? Because, if you're sitting here saying that we want to increase our revenue, our retention by 2%, well, what does that mean? Right? And you start talking about a 2% increase in revenue is an additional $2 million, or I'm sorry, a 2% increase in retention is an additional $2 million that we didn't have to go out and do anything for. We didn't have to go sell it. We already have a team that's doing this. The team costs less than, the team most likely is already doing these things. But if we can attach a goal to getting us to additional $2 million just by saving accounts, like that's huge, right? Especially when you're talking about everyone go out there, look how much revenue your companies are making. how much they're generating. $2 million is a lot of money.
Yeah, and it's powerful hearing this from you
Yeah.
in your position, I would say.
And I think everything you just said, Joanel, is advice that CS leaders and company leaders who are looking for investment, again, whether it's from a VC firm or from private equity, advice that they should follow and heed your advice, right? Are there any other pieces of advice that you would give to somebody whose company is, thinking about seeking out investment? Things you guys look for?
I would say, being open, like, you came to a company, you came to a firm with a desire, right? Whether that's, we need an influx of cash so we can go out and make investments and it's a VC, or it's private equity and we're giving a minority or majority ownership to this private equity firm. Take some time to recognize, like, what do I get in return for this, right? Yeah, you're going to get money, obviously. But what resources are you able to provide to us? What do you give to CEOs? What do you give to, each department? What kind of resources come with this investment? And I think it's really important to understand, just as much as we're sort of doing our due diligence on a company and their viability, it's important for you to do that due diligence too, and compare. And, sometimes you look at it, and I've done a couple of rounds of funding where everyone's like, oh, I just want the name. I want it to be, this on the press release that we went with this company or this firm or that firm. But part of that shopping is really, what else am I going to get? What's their history? What's their track record? There are a lot of companies out there that may make investments. There are firms that may make investments, and maybe they don't offer the same type of resource. Mm-hmm. If you're looking at that versus another firm that may be able to offer some resources to you, really think about, how would that help me? What can I gain from that? Because it's not just about what you're going to get. You're also thinking about learning, right? Like the learning aspect. What am I going to learn? So when I get into my next company, because most CEOs are not one and done, right? What am I going to learn from this experience that makes me more marketable on my next one? So I would say it's that. And then I also believe that if you do have these resources, use them. We are eager to help. And I think, we're not in the weeds. So we see things slightly different. We see the gap. We see the thing that, is lurking around the corner because we've been in that role before. And we're also not emotionally tied to this sort of day-to-day. So sometimes we see things that people may not be looking at, but we can't help unless people ask for help. And especially with the way that our firm works, we want to be seen as helpful. So we're not, running around telling people this is what you're going to do, which is maybe different than other people's experiences. But I do believe that when people genuinely want to help, like it's hard when you don't allow it, and it's hard when you don't want it. And I think sometimes that comes from just building additional trust. But you also have to be open. Right. So those are my biggest takeaways. Take some time to get to know the firms that you're potentially going to be working with. And then when the resources are there, don't be afraid to ask for help, and don't shy away from it either. Right. We're not We're not the big bad wolf. I think that's something that I've heard from other, other colleagues, other places, people who have dealt with other firms. They're like, oh, but you're going to just do this. And I'm like, no, I just want to help you. Please let me help you.
Great advice.
Yeah.
Well, we have a few really excellent audience questions I want to make sure we have time to get to. Everyone out there, if you have a question for Joanel, please go ahead and pop it in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. So I thought this one was really interesting. Going back to earlier, we were talking a little bit about forecasting. And I've actually seen a lot about this, a lot of conversation on LinkedIn about this topic recently as well, of companies kind of dumping bad fit customers. Particularly lately, I've seen a few examples of companies saying, nope, we're not going to service SMB anymore. See ya. Goodbye. And I don't know that that's specifically what this person is asking about, but my 2 cents. So the question is, how do you address portfolios that are full of bad fit customers and the focus of the company no longer adds value to them when you're forecasting? Do you make a plan to reduce the revenue with top line or expansion? Is it okay to decide we're not going to service the SMB anymore? What do you think, Jenna?
So I think, yeah, so that's a tough one, right? Oh. There's a couple things that I'll start with is, has your company identified their ideal customer profile? Have you taken analysis to understand if these companies are in the ICP or if they're not? And if they're not in the ICP, what kind of investment do we want to make into maintaining them? Again, it's all math, right? How much of our customers are not in the ICP? What does that equate to from a revenue standpoint? If we were to not service those customers, is the entire company okay with potentially losing out on, X dollars? And is there a way for us to provide that service that is not one-to-one? That's, maybe we only give them access to a knowledge base. Maybe we still support those customers, but we just don't support them in a rushed manner. Right. So we start thinking about not necessarily walking away from them, but creating a path that puts a buffer between your service and getting them the help that they need. So it puts a little bit more effort into support, right? Support's probably got to build out that knowledge base. They're probably going to have more tickets with longer SLAs. But it also says that this is a scaling model where we're not leaving so much revenue up for grabs or, potentially losing. And if those customers don't like the way that we're going to service their spend, then we're okay with them eventually churning on their own.
Yeah, no, I mean, my immediate reaction when I've seen, like I said, a few of these recently is I was like, oh, where's your digital? Where's your automation? Like, come on, everyone. It hurt my heart a little bit.
Well, and it's hard because people when they're like, oh, this is a bad fit from sales. Like, let's be honest. I love sales. There's always going to be bad fits from sales. Yeah. And we're always going to have to do our best to own them. And so I think part of what we need to do as leaders is bake in the churn, really understand, what churn is acceptable, and then work with those sales teams to say, hey, this particular group isn't necessarily in our ICP. They're pretty difficult to service. Is there a specific reason why we continued to work with them through the sales cycle? Because sometimes people are going to say, oh, they open up a door for us. Oh, we want to get to a point where we can service them. And so instead of reacting and being like, ew, God, salespeople, we kind of need to look and say, like, what was the vision? And now we back into okay, well, if this is the vision, here's all the things that we would need to do to support this client and support this particular type of client should we grow in that base. And I think there's where that bigger question of, oh, CS is strategically thinking about this comes in, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Awesome. Irene, I hope that answers your question. Another good one that we got from the audience from Alistair, from an individual contributor perspective, what are you hearing is the biggest drain on their ability to have those value and outcome-based conversations? I think this is a big one. We see this a lot.
Okay, so the amount of work you spend doing the administrative tasks is really always what it comes down to: administrative tasks and then escalations. So an exercise that is really helpful to do is really being able to display how much time a week you're spending on escalations and how much time you spend servicing your clients. There's a whole worksheet that you can do on it. But basically it helps leadership understand in a 40-hour work week, I'm spending 32 hours of my time answering customer questions, dealing with escalations, chasing down engineering, chasing down support tickets. And so the rest of my time, I can't really spend building relationships. In addition to that, if I were to do a QBR, it takes 30 minutes to build out the deck and then another hour to deliver it, right? Like there's a lot of things where people forget how much time is being spent on value add items, right? Things that establish our relationship, but they aren't true value add items, right? So we have to take some time to look at it from that perspective. If you want to talk about that, you can send me a message on LinkedIn and we can kind of walk through that. But I do think that there is that exercise should be done quarterly because it also helps with headcount planning and resourcing, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. That time spent analysis is huge, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we're sitting, in a leader's chair, I think you're totally right, Joanel. We forget. Oh yeah. Things take a lot of time, right? And it can be especially difficult when you're like, oh, I have spent so much time as a leader trying to build out processes and systems and tools and whatever to save my team time. And so it can be hard to kind of take a good hard look in the mirror and be like, oh, but like maybe they're still spending a lot of time doing
right. Well, and then that's the other part. Like I'm still helping people build out their own processes. And in my head, I'm like, how many steps is this? Right? Because I want to be cognizant that like they're going to get pushback from their individual contributors that like, what is this? This is like so much work. So I think that there's a lot in there about what is going to give us a return versus what just needs to get done to maintain satisfaction.
Yeah, I think that's so true. Well, I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. Peter, any other questions or comments from you or for Joanel before
Well, I just want to comment on the question that's left from Frankie. Frank, if you want to have a conversation with me about that, I spent 5.5 years at Oracle doing exactly what that question's asking. So you can reach out to me directly on LinkedIn or Parmalee at esgsuccess.com, and I'd be happy to jump on a call with you about that. Before we close, Marley, I just want to thank Joanel myself. I learned a ton in this hour. Really appreciate that. It was way exceeded my expectations even.
Amazing.
Well,
I love when that happens. Yes, Joanel, thank you so much for joining us. This conversation was incredibly enlightening. I hope it was for everyone in the audience as well. Reminder, everyone will get this recording if you want to revisit any of the topics we discussed. It'll be in your email tomorrow. And both Joanel and Peter just extended very generous offers to chat with folks about many of the topics we discussed. So I encourage everyone to take them up on that. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you will come back next month for the next Customer Success Unlocked. Have a great day, everyone.
A great one. Bye.